They said she was too broken to be worth anything. That's what they whispered in the dusty auction yard, the air thick with the smell of dry dirt and cheap whiskey. They looked at the woman on the block, the one with the noticeable limp and the eyes that held the quiet cold of a long winter. Her name was Eleanor Price, and she was the last item of the day. The auctioneer, a man with a sweat-stained hat and a booming voice, tried to make it sound like a deal. A woman who can still cook, still sew. Her leg ain't perfect, but her hands work just fine. A ripple of cruel laughter went through the crowd of ranchers and farmhands. They saw a burden, a mouth to feed that couldn't pull its weight in the fields, a flaw, a mistake, a life to be gotten for cheap. The bidding started at $2, not even the price of a good sack of flour. It was an insult and everyone knew it. $1, silence. $1.50, more snickering. Eleanor stood there, her hand gripping a worn carved walking stick. She didn't flinch. She didn't look down. Years of being passed around, from one reluctant relative to the next, had taught her how to build a fortress inside herself. You could mock the walls, but you couldn't touch what was inside, or so she hoped. Then from the back of the crowd, a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it was clear as a bell. $2. Every head turned. A man stepped forward. He was tall, dressed in a weathered coat and scuffed boots that spoke of long miles. His face was all sharp angles and shadows under the brim of his hat, and his eyes were the color of a storm cloud about to break. He looked empty, like a house that had been vacant for a long, long time. He didn't look at the auctioneer. He looked right at Eleonora, and in his gaze there wasn't pity, there wasn't kindness. There was something else, something she couldn't read, something that felt an awful lot like recognition. "Sold!" the auctioneer barked, slamming his gavel down before anyone could change their mind. The man, Samuel Carter he called himself, walked up, laid 2 silver coins in the auctioneer's palm, and took the small, pathetic bag that held all of Eleanor's worldly possessions. He didn't offer her his arm. He didn't smile. He just nodded toward his wagon. "Let's go," he said. As she followed him, each step measured and slow, the whispers followed her like ghosts. Poor fool. Pity's a powerful drink. He must be desperate for a cook. They thought they knew the story. A broken woman bought by a lonely man. A simple tale of pity and pragmatism on the harsh frontier. But what if I told you that wasn't the story at all? What if the limp was a lie? What if the lonely rancher wasn't lonely but hunting? And what if the $2 woman wasn't the prey, but the bait? The ride to the Carter Ranch was silent. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy one, thick with things unsaid. The wheels of the old buckboard wagon groaned under the weight of it. Eleonora sat straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the endless, rolling plains that stretched out before them. She'd learned long ago that questions were a luxury. Questions implied you had a right to answers, and she'd been taught she had no rights at all. Samuel Carter didn't seem to mind the silence. He just held the reins, his knuckles calloused and sure, his gaze locked on the horizon as if he were trying to see through it, to whatever lay beyond. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived. The ranch wasn't much, a small, sturdy house that looked like it had been built to withstand a siege, a barn with doors that hung just a little crooked, fences that were mended in a dozen different places. It was a place that had seen hard times and hadn't given up, much like the man who owned it. He led her inside. The air smelled of old wood smoke, coffee, and something else. Solitude. It was clean, sparse, a man's home with no frills. "This will be your room," he said, pointing to a small door off the kitchen. She expected a cot, maybe a thin mattress on the floor. She stepped inside and stopped. It was a real room, a simple bed with a neatly patched quilt, a small window looking out over the fields, and on the door a brand new, heavy iron lock. Her heart sank. Of course, a lock. But then Samuel did something she didn't expect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He didn't put it in the lock from the outside. He pressed it into her palm. "It locks from the inside," he said, his voice flat, unreadable. "No one will bother you." He turned and walked away before she could respond. leaving her standing there with the cold, heavy weight of the key in her hand. A key, control, safety. These were words she no longer understood. For years, her life had been a series of doors locked by other people. Now she held the key herself. It felt less like a kindness and more like a test. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes like a restless spirit. The silence of the house was deafening. She listened for his footsteps, for any sign of what he might want from her. But there was nothing. Just the wind and the creaking of the old house. She lay on the bed, fully clothed, her hand still clutching the key. This was wrong. All of it. The way he'd looked at her at the auction, the lock on the door, the feeling that she was a piece in a game she didn't understand. Her instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed at her. She slid off the bed, her limp suddenly less pronounced in the dim moonlight. She moved across the small room, her bare feet silent on the wooden floorboards. She knelt, her fingers tracing the seams between the planks. One of them felt loose. She worked her fingernails into the crack and pried. The board came up with a soft groan. She reached into the dark space beneath. Her fingers brushed against cold, smooth metal, wrapped in oilcloth. She pulled it out. It was a pistol, small, perfectly weighted, and smelling of fresh gun oil. Tucked beside it was a small box. She opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single gleaming bullet. She hadn't put it there. The dust on the floorboards was undisturbed. It had been waiting for her. Samuel Carter hadn't just given her a key to her room. He had given her a weapon. Why? Why would a man buy a woman for $2 and then arm her? The question echoed in the silent room, more terrifying than any threat. She looked at the pistol in her hand, then at the locked door. She was starting to think this wasn't a rescue. It was a recruitment. The next morning, the game of quiet observation began. When Eleonora emerged from her room, Samuel was already by the stove, frying eggs that sizzled in an old cast-iron skillet. He didn't seem to notice that she hadn't slept. "You cook?" he asked, his back to her. "I can," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Good. My eggs taste like boiled leather." He slid a plate onto the table without looking at her and went outside. She ate alone, every bite tasting of suspicion. She cleaned the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes taking in every detail of the small house. There were no pictures, no trinkets, nothing personal at all except for a shelf of books. She ran her finger along their spines. They weren't novels or Bibles. They were books on strategy, engineering, and regional geography. The kinds of books a general might read, not a simple rancher. Later, she saw him from the window, repairing a fence. He worked with a relentless, focused energy. Every movement had a purpose. There was no wasted motion. She noticed a small, lonely graveyard on a hill overlooking the ranch. 3 simple wooden crosses, weathered gray by the wind. When he came in for water, he saw her looking. "My wife. 2 sons," he said, his voice as flat as the plains. "Winter fever, 5 years back." The story was clean. Too clean. There was no crack in his voice, no flicker of pain in his eyes. It sounded rehearsed, a line he had practiced until it had lost all meaning. She nodded, murmuring her condolences. But inside, a cold certainty was growing. He was lying. The days fell into a strange rhythm. He would work the ranch. She would manage the house. They spoke very little, but the silence was a conversation in itself. He was watching her. He'd leave a map of the territory spread out on the table, seemingly by accident, and watch from the corner of his eye to see if she looked at it. He'd mention the name of a town, a river, a mountain pass, and wait for her reaction. She gave him nothing. She played the part of the broken, simple woman perfectly. She cooked. She cleaned. She limped. She kept her head down. But at night in her locked room, she would practice. She'd hold the pistol, feeling its weight become an extension of her own hand. She'd move around the room, testing her bad leg, pushing it, finding the limits of the pain, learning to move in a way that was silent and swift, the limp disappearing when no one was watching. One afternoon, he came in early from the fields. "I'm going into town for supplies," he said. "Be back after dark." She just nodded. But as soon as his wagon disappeared over the horizon, she went to work. This was her chance. She searched the house. Not for money or valuables, but for answers. She found nothing in the main room or his Spartan bedroom. It was all just as it seemed. Then she went to the barn. The air was thick with the smell of hay and leather. She moved past the stalls, her eyes scanning everything. A loose floorboard near the back wall caught her eye. It was too clean, the dirt around it not as packed down as the rest. Using a crowbar from the tool rack, she pried it up. Beneath it was a small, locked metal box. She didn't have the key. She looked around, her frustration mounting. Then she saw it. Tucked away on a high ledge, almost invisible in the gloom, was a ledger. She climbed up and pulled it down. It wasn't a record of cattle sales. It was full of names, dates, and numbers. Coded entries detailing movements of men, shipments of weapons, and payouts to informants. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a ranch. It was a listening post. An operational base. One line of code jumped out at her. It was a sequence she recognized, a cipher used by a very specific, very dangerous group of people. People she knew. A cold dread washed over her. She heard the sound of the wagon returning. He was back early. He had lied. It was another test. She scrambled to put the ledger back, to replace the floorboard, but it was too late. He was standing in the doorway of the barn, a shadow against the bright afternoon sun. He wasn't holding a bag of supplies. He was holding a rifle. His eyes weren't cold or empty anymore. They were sharp, intelligent, and absolutely lethal. "Looking for something?" he asked. His voice was different, too. The rustic drawl was gone, replaced by something harder, more refined. She stood up slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The charade was over. "The story about the wagon wheel that crushed your ankle," he said, taking a step into the barn. "The one that gave you the limp. Tell it to me again. But this time, try telling the truth." Eleanor's mind raced. He knew. He had known all along. The auction, the ranch, the quiet observation. It had all been a stage, a performance designed to see if she would break character. She looked from the rifle in his hands to the cold certainty in his eyes. Lying was useless now, but so was telling the whole truth. "Some stories are best left buried," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the fear coiling in her gut. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Not this one." He gestured with the rifle towards the back of the barn. "Come on, I think it's time we stop playing games." He led her not to the house, but to a seemingly solid wall of hay bales stacked against the far end of the barn. He pulled a specific bale from the middle of the stack, revealing a heavy iron ring door set into the ground. A root cellar. But the lock on it was new and far too strong for storing preserves. He unlocked it and motioned for her to go down. The air that rose from the darkness was cool and smelled of damp earth and gun oil. The cellar was not what she expected. It was a hidden arsenal. Rifles were mounted on the stone walls. Crates of ammunition were stacked neatly in the corners, and a large table dominated the center of the room, covered in detailed maps of the territory, marked with pins and cryptic notations. This was the nerve center of his entire operation. He lit a lantern, and the small space filled with a warm, flickering light. He leaned his rifle against the wall and turned to face her. The man she knew as Samuel Carter was gone. In his place was a stranger, someone far more dangerous. "My name is Josiah Thorne," he said. "I was a federal marshal. Was. Until my family was murdered by a man named Silas Kane." The name hit her like a physical blow. Silas. "He thought he killed me too," Josiah continued, his voice a low, chilling monotone. "Left me for dead in my burning home. I survived. I buried my wife and sons, faked my own death, and created Samuel Carter. And for the last 5 years, I have been hunting the man who took everything from me." He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "My hunt led me to whispers of a woman. A woman passed from one of Silas's flunkies to another, sold at backwater auctions. A woman with a limp who they said carried a secret Silas would kill to get back. A woman they called Eleanor Price." He took a step closer. "But that's not your real name, is it? Just like your limp isn't just from a wagon wheel. You're Anya, and Silas Kane isn't your brother-in-law. He's the man who murdered your father and stole your land." Every word was a nail in the coffin of her old life. He knew everything. She sank onto one of the ammunition crates, the strength leaving her legs. The fortress she had built inside herself was crumbling. "How?" she whispered. "I have my sources," he said dismissively. "The real question isn't how I know. The question is, what did you take from him, Anya? What is so important that he's been hunting you across 3 territories, not to kill you, but to capture you?" She looked up at him, at this ghost of a man fueled by nothing but vengeance. She could see the same fire in him that burned in her. They were 2 sides of the same coin, forged in the same fire of loss and betrayal. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a dangerous, reckless spark of trust. She reached into the collar of her dress, into a secret pocket sewn into the lining, and pulled out a small, tightly folded piece of oilcloth. She unwrapped it on the table under the lantern light. It was a deed. The original Spanish land grant for the entire valley, including the silver-rich mountains Silas now controlled. It was her family's name on the document. Her birthright. The one thing that proved Silas was a fraud and a thief. "This," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is why he wants me. Without it, his claim is built on sand. With it, I can destroy him." Josiah stared at the deed, then back at her. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "I didn't buy a cook, Anya. I didn't buy a victim." He reached across the table and tapped the deed with one finger. "I bought a key, and you just unlocked the door to Silas Kane's grave." The alliance was forged in that dusty, hidden armory, a pact sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared, burning hatred. The fragile identities of Samuel and Eleonora were shed like old skins, leaving Josiah and Anya, 2 survivors bound by a singular purpose, the destruction of Silas Kane. The dynamic between them shifted instantly. The quiet deference was gone, replaced by a tense, professional respect. He was no longer her master, and she was no longer his purchase. They were partners. "Silas is arrogant," Anya began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, the years of suppressed anger now fueling her. "He thinks I'm broken. He moves me around, sells me off because it amuses him. It's a game. He likes to let his prey think it has a chance before he closes the trap." "His game ends here," Josiah said, his eyes scanning the maps on the table. "This ranch is remote, defensible. He'll send scouts before he commits his main force. We need to be ready." The next few days were a blur of preparation. The ranch transformed. What had looked like disrepair was revealed to be calculated design. A loose floorboard in the house became a firing position. A crooked fence post concealed a cache of ammunition. The entire property was a meticulously crafted kill box, and Josiah was its architect. He trained her relentlessly. He took her to a hidden ravine behind the ranch and made her shoot. At first her hands trembled, the pistol feeling alien. But the muscle memory was there, buried deep beneath years of pretending to be weak. Her father had taught her to shoot long before Silas had destroyed their world. Josiah pushed her. "The limp," he commanded one afternoon. "Lose it." She looked at him, confused. "It's a liability in a fight," he said, "but it can also be a weapon. You've used it to appear weak. Now use it to be unpredictable. Your rhythm is broken. Your cadence is off. No one can predict how you'll move. Use that." So she practiced. She learned to shift her weight, to turn the weakness into a deceptive strength, her uneven steps making her a difficult target to track. She was no longer hiding behind the limp. She was weaponizing it. As they worked, they talked. Fragments of their pasts emerged. Shards of broken lives pieced together in the quiet moments between training sessions. He told her about his wife, Sarah, and his 2 boys, Daniel and Luke. He spoke of their laughter, the smell of his wife's baking, the weight of his sons in his arms. He spoke of the fire, the smoke, and Silas's face, laughing in the flames. His grief was a cold, hard thing, a whetstone on which he sharpened his rage. Anya, in turn, told him about her father, a proud man who had refused to bow to Silas's greed. She spoke of the night Silas and his men came, the gunshots, her father's fall, and the smirk on Silas's face as he declared himself the new master of the valley. She spoke of her escape, the bullet in her leg, and the years spent running, hiding, surviving. They were 2 ghosts haunting the world of the living, and they found a strange comfort in each other's company. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was understanding. One evening, as they cleaned their rifles by the fire, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. It wasn't one of Silas's men. It was a boy, no older than 15, riding a tired-looking mare. He was the son of the general store owner in the nearby town of Redemption. The boy, Peter, slid off his horse, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Carter, my pa sent me. He said to tell you, they're here." "Who's here?" Josiah asked, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Two men, asking about a woman with a limp. My pa sent them on a wild goose chase up the North Canyon, but they'll figure it out soon enough. He said to tell you." "Silas knows." Josiah's jaw tightened. He handed the boy a canteen of water. "Get back to your father. Tell him we're grateful, and tell him to be careful." The boy nodded, mounted his horse, and disappeared back into the twilight. Anya looked at Josiah. "Your sources? It's him, isn't it? The store owner." "Henley," Josiah confirmed. "He's a good man. Lost his own farm to Silas years ago. He's been my eyes and ears in town." The news was bad, but it was expected. The first pieces were moving on the board. The scouts. "They'll be here by morning," Josiah said, his voice grim. "Let them come," Anya replied, her hand closing around the stock of her rifle. Her eyes, once filled with the quiet cold of winter, now held the glint of sharpened steel. They didn't have to wait until morning. They came in the dead of night, moving under the cover of a moonless sky. Two shadows detaching themselves from the deeper darkness of the plains. They moved with the overconfident swagger of predators who believe their prey is helpless. They were wrong. From a darkened window in the house, Anya watched them through the sights of her rifle. Her breathing was slow and even, her heart a steady drum against her ribs. The fear was gone, burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. Josiah was in the barn, a ghost in the hayloft, his own rifle resting on a bale of hay. They had planned this, rehearsed it, every angle, every contingency. The two men split up, one headed for the house, the other for the barn. It was a classic pincer move, designed to corner a lone farmer. A fatal mistake. The man approaching the house crept onto the porch, his boots silent on the wooden planks. He paused at the door, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt. He was savoring the moment. Inside, Anya didn't move. She waited, timed her breathing to the whisper of the wind. The man reached for the doorknob. Crack. The sound of Josiah's rifle shot ripped through the night. The man in the barn doorway, who had been about to step inside, crumpled to the ground without a sound. The man on the porch froze, startled by the shot. He spun around, trying to locate the source. In that split second of confusion, Anya fired. Her shot was clean, precise. The man on the porch dropped his knife with a clatter and fell backward off the steps. Silence descended once more, broken only by the chirping of crickets, who seemed entirely unimpressed by the sudden violence. They waited for a full 10 minutes, motionless, scanning the darkness for any sign of a third man. Nothing. Josiah emerged from the barn, moving cautiously. Anya met him on the porch. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. It was a smell of finality, a smell of justice. They searched the bodies. They were carrying coin, ammunition, and standard supplies. But on the first man, the one who had been heading for the barn, Josiah found something else. Tucked into his coat was a folded piece of paper. He opened it under the light of the lantern he'd brought from the house. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a warrant. It was a map. A crude, hand-drawn map of the Carter Ranch. But it was frighteningly accurate. It showed the layout of the house, the barn, even the location of the well. And there were two small X's marked on it, one on the front porch, one at the main door of the barn. The exact spots where the two men had been standing when they were shot. It wasn't just a map. It was an attack plan. And it was based on information that could have only come from someone who had been to the ranch. Someone who had seen the layout up close. Anya's blood ran cold. Who else has been here, Josiah? Who else knows this place? Josiah stared at the map, his face a grim mask in the lantern light. His network was small, tight-knit. He trusted no one. Except, only one person, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The man who helped me build this identity. The man who has been my eyes and ears for 5 years. His gaze lifted, looking toward the distant sleeping town of Redemption. Henley, the store owner. The betrayal hit harder than any bullet. Henley, the kind, grizzled man who had vouched for Samuel Carter when he first arrived. The man who had just sent his own son to warn them. It didn't make sense. It can't be, Anya said, shaking her head. He warned us. Why would he warn us if he was working for Silas? To play both sides, Josiah growled, crumpling the map in his fist. To make us trust him, right before the knife goes in. Silas must have gotten to him, threatened him, bribed him. It doesn't matter. He's compromised. The ranch, once their fortress, now felt like a trap. If Henley had given Silas a map, what other information had he shared? Did Silas know about the armory? Did he know Josiah's real identity? We can't stay here, Anya said, her mind racing. Silas won't send just 2 men next time. He'll send his whole gang. Running is what he expects, Josiah countered, his mind already shifting from defense to attack. We've been on the defensive for too long, Anya. It's time to change the game. He strode back into the house, Anya following close behind. He lit a lamp and spread a fresh map out on the kitchen table, the one showing the entire territory. Silas has the numbers, he said, his finger tracing a line from the ranch to the town of Redemption. But he's comfortable. He thinks he's a king in his castle. His main camp is here, he tapped a spot in the mountains, at the old abandoned silver mine. Heavily guarded, impenetrable. So we can't attack him there, Anya stated. No, Josiah agreed. We make him come to us. Not here. Here. His finger landed on the town of Redemption. Anya stared at him. The town? You want to fight him in the town? There are innocent people there, Josiah. Families, children. They're not innocent, he replied, his voice hard. They're hostages, don't you see? Every person in that town is living under Silas's thumb. Henley is just the first one to crack. Silas owns them, through fear and intimidation. They mock you at the auction not because they're cruel, but because they're terrified. They have to play their parts. We don't just need to kill Silas, we need to liberate that town. The scope of his plan was audacious, bordering on insane. But she saw the logic in it. Silas's power didn't just come from his gang of thugs. It came from the silent complicity of the terrorized. How? She asked. It's just the 2 of us. No, Josiah said, a fierce light in his eyes. We have something Silas doesn't. We have the truth. He looked at her, at the deed she still kept hidden. And we have a reason for the people to fight. Their plan was desperate, a long shot that relied on courage and hope. 2 commodities in short supply in Redemption. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the hills, Josiah rode for town, not as a vengeful phantom, but as Samuel Carter, a concerned neighbor. Anya remained at the ranch, a solitary guardian, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of dust that would signal the arrival of Silas's army. Josiah found Henley in the back of his general store, stacking tins of peaches. The man looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His hands trembled, and his eyes darted around nervously. They didn't come back, Henley said, his voice a dry rasp. It wasn't a question. No, Josiah said, his voice low and calm. They didn't. He placed the crumpled map on the counter between them. This is why. Henley stared at the map, and all the color drained from his face. He sank onto a nearby crate, his head in his hands. He has my daughter, he whispered, his voice cracking. He took my Sarah. He said if I didn't help him, if I didn't tell him everything I knew about you, he'd send her back to me in pieces. The confession came out in a torrent of guilt and fear. Silas had been blackmailing him for months. Henley had played along, feeding Silas bits of information, trying to buy time, hoping to protect his daughter. Sending his son with the warning had been a desperate act of a man torn between 2 impossible choices. Josiah listened, his face impassive. When Henley was done, a broken man weeping amidst his supplies, Josiah didn't offer condemnation. He offered a third choice. We're going to get her back, Josiah said, and we're going to destroy Silas. But I can't do it alone. I need your help. I need the town. Henley looked up, his eyes filled with despair. The town? They're scared, Samuel. They won't fight. They'll hide in their homes and pray he passes them by. Then we have to give them a reason not to hide, Josiah said. He explained the plan, the truth about Anya, the deed, the chance to finally be free from the shadow of Silas Kane. It was a gamble, a huge one. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Anya waited. The morning bled into a tense, silent afternoon. The sun beat down on the empty plains. The silence was unnerving, too quiet. Then she saw it, a single rider, coming fast. It wasn't Josiah. She grabbed her rifle and took up a position in the house, her heart pounding. The rider galloped right up to the front gate, reining his horse in so hard it reared up. It was one of Silas's men. But he wasn't here to fight. He was carrying a white flag. "Eleonora Price," he yelled. "Silas Kane wants a parlay. He offers you a choice. Come with us now, and he'll spare the town. The whole town of Redemption. Refuse, and he'll burn it to the ground before supper." Anya's stomach twisted into a knot. It was a trap. She knew it was a trap. But the threat, burn the town to the ground. He would do it. He was just cruel enough. The rider continued. "He says to give you this," a gesture of his sincerity. He reached into his saddlebag and threw something into the dirt in front of the house. It was a small cloth doll, the kind a little girl would cherish. Anya's blood ran cold. She recognized it. She had seen it in the general store. It belonged to Henley's daughter, Sarah. Silas wasn't just threatening the town. He was proving he already held the piece that mattered most. The plan had just gone to hell. Silas wasn't waiting for them to make a move. He was forcing her hand. Surrender herself, or be responsible for the slaughter of dozens of innocent people, including a little girl. She looked from the doll in the dirt to the rider, who sat there with a smug look on his face. She thought of Josiah in town trying to rally the very people whose lives now rested on her decision. There was no choice. Not really. She put down her rifle. She unbolted the door and stepped out onto the porch, raising her hands in surrender. The old limp was back, more pronounced than ever. She was Eleonora Price again, a broken woman, a perfect victim. "Tell Silas," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I accept his offer." The ride to Silas's camp was a grim, silent procession. Anya was surrounded by a dozen of his men, a lamb being led to the slaughter. She kept her head down, her expression one of pure terror, playing the part she had perfected over years of captivity. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of calculation. This was not a surrender. It was an infiltration. Josiah's plan had been to bring the fight to the town. Her new plan was to bring the fight directly to the heart of the beast. They arrived at the old silver mine as dust settled over the mountains. The camp was a hive of activity, a temporary town built on fear and stolen wealth. Men with cruel faces and guns on their hips watched her as she was dragged toward the largest tent, set at the very center of the camp. Silas Kane was waiting for her. He was not what most would expect. He wasn't a brutish giant. He was a man of average height, impeccably dressed, with intelligent eyes and a charming smile that never quite reached them. It was his smile that was the most terrifying thing about him. It was the smile of a predator that enjoys its work. "Anya," he said, his voice smooth as poison honey. "It's been too long. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble." He gestured for his men to leave them. They were alone in the tent, lit by a single expensive oil lamp. "Where is it?" he asked, his smile fading. "The deed. Give it to me, and I'll make your end quick." Anya feigned a trembling fear. It's at the ranch," she stammered. "Hidden. Only I know where." It was a lie, of course. The deed was still sewn into the collar of her dress. She just needed to buy time. Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh, and it chilled her to the bone. "Oh, Anya," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "You always were a terrible liar." He walked over to a heavy wooden chest in the corner of the tent and opened it. He reached inside and pulled out a document. It was old yellowed parchment, covered in flowing script. "You see," he said, holding it up for her to see, "I got tired of chasing your little piece of paper. So I had a new one made, a perfect forgery, and I even had the territorial judge, a very reasonable man, once a certain amount of gold was placed in his hands, Sign and seal it. It's all perfectly legal now. Her heart stopped. A forgery. All this time she had believed the deed was her only weapon, her only source of power, but he had bypassed it entirely. Then, then why? She whispered. Why hunt me? Why bring me here? Silas's smile returned, colder and sharper than before. Because the forgery only works if the original never surfaces, and more importantly, it only works if the true heir, he gestured to her, is no longer around to contest it. I didn't need you for what you had, my dear. I needed you to disappear. The trap had closed. She had walked right into it. Her one bargaining chip was worthless. Josiah was in town, trying to rally people for a fight that was already lost. It's a shame, Silas said, pulling a small silver-plated derringer from his coat pocket. He cocked the hammer. The click was deafeningly loud in the silent tent. All that running, all that hiding, all for nothing. He raised the pistol, aiming it directly at her heart. And at that exact moment, a single, clear bugle call echoed through the canyon from outside the camp. Silas froze, the pistol wavering. What in God's name was that? Another bugle answered from the opposite side of the camp, then another, and another. The calls were coming from all directions, echoing off the canyon walls, making it sound like they were surrounded by an entire army. Chaos erupted outside the tent. Men were shouting, running, firing their guns blindly into the darkness. Silas stared at Anya, his eyes wide with confusion and fury. What did you do? Anya allowed herself a small, cold smile. You thought you were playing a game of checkers, Silas, but you stumbled into a game of chess. Josiah hadn't stayed in town. Rallying the townsfolk was only part of the plan. The real plan was far more cunning. While he was in redemption, he hadn't just been talking to Henley. He had been talking to everyone. The blacksmith, the stable owner, the ranchers who had lost their land. He showed them the deed. He told them Anya's story. He told them his story. He didn't offer them a choice between fighting and hiding. He offered them a chance to take their lives back, and he gave them a role to play. The bugle calls were a diversion, manned by a handful of boys, including Henley's son Peter, positioned on the ridges surrounding the camp. A classic military tactic, the ghost army, designed to create panic and confusion, to make a small force seem immense. While Silas's men were firing at shadows, the real attack began. Josiah and a small, determined force of about 20 townsmen, armed with the rifles from his cellar, weren't launching a full frontal assault. They were conducting a surgical strike. Their target wasn't the camp. It was the horses. Under the cover of the chaos, they slipped into the canyon where the gang's horses were corralled and set them loose, driving them screaming into the night. An army without horses in this terrain was an army trapped. In the command tent, Silas realized what was happening. He grabbed Anya by the arm, dragging her outside. The camp was in utter turmoil. Men were running everywhere, their command structure shattered by the confusion. You won't get away, he snarled, pressing the derringer to her head. You're my shield. But Anya wasn't a shield. She was a weapon. She stomped down hard on his instep with the heel of her boot. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her elbow back into his ribs and twisted away, diving behind a stack of crates. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't from Silas's derringer. A bullet kicked up the dirt right where Silas had been standing. It was from Josiah. He and his men were at the edge of the camp, laying down covering fire, their shots precise and deadly. The firefight was brutal and short. Silas's disorganized men were no match for the disciplined fire of Josiah's small group. They were trapped, leaderless, and terrified. Many threw down their guns and surrendered. Silas, however, was not giving up. He saw his empire crumbling around him and made a run for it, scrambling up the rocky path toward the entrance of the old silver mine. Anya went after him. This wasn't Josiah's fight to finish. It was hers. She pursued him into the darkness of the mine tunnel, the sounds of the battle fading behind them. It was just the two of them now, two ghosts settling a debt a decade old. He fired his derringer back into the darkness. The shot went wide, ricocheting off the stone walls. He was out of bullets. She could hear him scrambling ahead of her, his panicked breaths echoing in the confined space. She didn't run. She walked, her limp deliberate, the tap thud of her steps and her cane on the rock floor, a steady, ominous rhythm, like a drum beat counting down his final seconds. He was trapped at a dead end, a collapsed tunnel. He turned, his face pale and sweating in the faint light from the mine entrance. He was cornered. "Anya, please," he begged, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a pathetic, sniveling coward. "We can make a deal. I have gold. More than you can imagine." She stepped into the light, her face a mask of cold fury. "You murdered my father. You destroyed my life. You hunted me like an animal." She raised her cane, the simple carved piece of wood she had leaned on for years. "There are no deals left to make." She didn't kill him. Death was too easy, too quick. She swung the cane, the heavy wood connecting with his kneecap with a sickening crack. He screamed and collapsed. She stood over him, her shadow falling across his broken form. "Now," she said, her voice a whisper of ice, "you have a limp of your own. Let's see how you like being the broken one." When she emerged from the mine, dragging a whimpering Silas cane behind her, the battle was over. Josiah and the men of redemption had captured the rest of the gang. Henley was there, his face streaked with grime and tears of relief. He had found his daughter, Sarah, locked in a supply wagon but unharmed. He ran to Anya and embraced her, the town's silent judgment replaced by a debt of gratitude that could never be repaid. They stood on the edge of the captured camp, the first rays of dawn painting the sky. The people of redemption were no longer hostages. They were free. Josiah walked over to Anya, his face tired but his eyes clear for the first time in 5 years. The ghosts of his past were finally quiet. "It's over," he said. "No," she replied, looking out at the valley, her valley as the sun rose over it. "It's just beginning." In the weeks that followed, the world shifted. With Silas and his gang in federal custody and the forged deed exposed, Anya's rightful claim to the valley was recognized. She was, overnight, one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory. But she didn't keep it. She called a town meeting. In the same dusty square where she had once been sold for $2, she stood before the people of redemption. She wasn't Eleonora the broken or Anya the vengeful. She was their founder. She tore the deed in two. She announced that the valley would be divided. Parcels of land were given to every family that had been terrorized by Silas, returning what had been stolen from them. The silver mine became the property of the town, its profits to be used to build a school, a church, and a real doctor's office. She didn't want to be a ruler. She wanted to build a community. Josiah was offered his marshal's badge back, a full pardon for his time as a vigilante. He respectfully declined. His war was over. His hunt was done. He planned to leave, to disappear again, find a new corner of the world where he could be alone. But on the morning he was set to ride out, he found Anya on the porch of the ranch, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Nothing left for me here," he said, not meeting her eyes. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "This ranch is the only piece of land I kept for myself. It's a bit big for one person, and the eggs still taste like leather when I try to make them." He finally looked at her. Her face, which he had first seen as a mask of stoic endurance, was now open, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. The limp was still there, a part of her story, but it was no longer a symbol of weakness. It was a testament to her strength. They had both been broken, shattered by the same man. But here, in this quiet place, they had taken the pieces of their lives and built something new, something stronger. "The $2 I paid for you," Josiah said softly, "was the best investment I ever made." "You didn't buy me, Josiah," she corrected him gently. "You paid the price of admission to a revolution, and you just happened to get a partner out of the deal." He looked out at the sunrise, at the peaceful land that was finally theirs. He looked at the woman beside him, a woman of iron and grace, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was home. Sometimes the most broken things are the ones with the most fight left in them, and sometimes the greatest treasures in this world don't come wrapped in gold, but in scars. If you believe that our past doesn't have to define our future, and that everyone deserves a second chance to fight back, then do me a favor and decimate that subscribe button. And be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think was the biggest turning point in this story? Was it the reveal in the cellar or the moment Anya decided to surrender? I read all your comments and I'm curious to know what you think. Thanks for stopping by.